Are you looking for ways to use a bunch of 6x8 patterned paper fast? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I'm going to be working with the Park Lane Fall Papercrafting paper pad. I don't know if it has a more specific name than that, but it has some foil elements. I like to just use a variety of patterned papers on my channel, some that you could get in big box stores if that's where you like to shop, some that are online, some that are made and manufactured outside the US, just so that I can show a variety of different things for those depending on how you can source your paper. And so this paper pad, I'm just going to give you a quick flip through. It has some cut aparts, it has some larger and smaller scale patterns, it has some foiling on some of the papers, some cute images like the squirrel, there's a fun turkey paper here. And then there are some papers that I would consider kind of challenging, this large mushroom or this large sunflower. So we're going to try to address some of the variety of pattern papers that are in this collection so that you feel like if you can tackle that and you can apply some of these ideas to a different paper pad you might have in your collection. Today we're going to pair our 6x8 patterned paper with some Slimline cards using my 6x8 paper busting templates for Slimline cards. So all 4 of these are available for free at jesscrafts.com. There'll be links to them in the video description, or you can purchase them as part of a larger pack in the Etsy shop if you don't want to download everything individually. Also, I'm only on number 4 at this point, so I'm going to share number 4. This is the first time anyone's seeing it, or it's being shown in a video, but there are 6 more in the pack, so you can get a peek of those before they come out, or use those before they come out, but they will all be released. They will all be free eventually at jesscrafts.com. So I have these Slimline cards. I cut them from craft cardstock. They are 8.5 long by 7 wide, and then folded in half so that they are a final size of 8.5 by 3.5, and it does create, if you create these with 8.5 by 11 paper, you're going to have that 4 by 8.5, if I've done my measurements correctly, strip left over of more craft cardstock or whatever cardstock you're making your bases for. And I'm going to talk about ways that I used some of that immediately so that I didn't have a big pile of scraps. But my method, paper busting templates, are making cards with no patterned paper scraps. So not saying anything about cardstock scraps. So template number 1 to me is where I'm going to try to get rid of this sunflower paper. I mean, get rid of it sounds funny, like, because I bought this because I liked it, but I need to come up with a good idea for using this sunflower paper. It's really big and bold, but I think one of the reasons I love Slimline cards for 6x8 paper is that I can use really, really big chunks of paper because the 8 inches is so close to the 8.5 inches that the card base is. Now, something I noticed about my particular craft cardstock and this paper pad is when you take the paper out of this paper pad, there is a perforation. And so I would personally prefer to cut that perforation off. So instead of just folding it like this, and then you can see, I'm gonna bring it up close, there's a little bit of those, like, I don't know, just that leftover stuff there. I prefer to cut that off. So when I do that, I am going to cut it to a little bit less than 8, as you can see here on my paper trimmer. It's probably actually really tough to see, but here's my 8-inch mark, and it's just a tiny bit less, and actually that wasn't even quite enough. It's very small. It's, maybe 1/8 of an inch, but that does make a difference in terms of it looking completely centered on here, so that is something you might want to take into account. Also, I found that my paper was a little bit longer than 8.5 inches, my cardstock. So there are some variations within pattern paper. Don't think that you did something wrong just because you're like, oh, they seem like they're a little bit too big or here. So it might be just the variations that happen naturally in paper. So sketch 1, super, super simple, but I think it's important to remind ourselves of the super, super simple things because it tells you just to cut your 6x8 paper in half to 3x8, and then you have this beautiful part of a sunflower. And instead of doing it like this, which I think you totally could, I think it'll look a little bit better as a landscape card. And so I am not even going to put a cardstock mat around this. I actually intentionally cut from craft cardstock to reduce the need for cardstock mats. I almost always show you how to use cardstock mats in case that is something you really like to do. So you'll find the measurements here for the cardstock mats. So we'll say, pattern paper size with a something something matte. So that's where those measurements are. But I kind of knew I was going to create a lot of cards today, and I wanted to keep it simple. So you can do a variety of cards with this really simple sketch and using some of those larger scale patterns, and some of them are going to need more decoration. But honestly, this one, I'm going to come here, and I told you I had a lot of craft scraps left, and they're fairly large size. I actually can reach down and get you one of them. So like this is what's left over when you cut the card base from an 8.5 by 11 to get a slimline card base. So that was enough to stamp a sentiment on. I'm going to be using the Tailored Expressions Mini Strips Harvest stamp set for all of my sentiments today. I wanted to show you this collection just because I think some people do find these style of stamps helpful, where you can stamp a whole bunch of sentiments and then a single coordinating die cuts them all out at one time. And the single coordinating die works for all the stamps in the mini strips collection. So I urge you, if that seems convenient, you to go, check it out with Tailored Expressions and get all the details and make sure you're, buying the right coordinating things. But they do have either the straight sentiments or the ones with a little bit of a banner cut in the side, which is what I'm using today. And they also have the mini strips backer. This one makes larger rectangles that coordinate with this other one. So, you don't want to accidentally buy this, because as you see, it will not cut those out. That's not what it's meant to do. So I have a whole bunch of sentiments. I do organize them in these boxes that are also from Tailored Expressions. The top holds 9 different sentiments, but there are 10 in the set, so you would have to like double up in one of them. And then the bottom does hold 10. So I fit 2 per box, but you have to do that doubling up thing or take a sentiment out that you don't use or something like that. And then I'm just going to add a simple "with gratitude" off on the right hand corner here. I thought about putting it in the center, but with that little banner edge, when there's a straight edge and a banner edge, I kind of like to line it up with a flat edge. Some of the other patterns in the collection are kind of large in scale, but they're not necessarily as interesting. Like they don't have this really large, clear focal point like the flower. And so I don't want to do something as simple as cutting them in half. That just, I'm going to need to add a lot to that. You absolutely could use this paper for that, but doing something to break it up can help quite a bit. And then there's this paper that's kind of like a flannel look to it. I'm going to cut them both in half, and we're going to go to sketch number 2, and it has a really simple solution of just cutting a circle out of the center. If you have double-sided paper, what is nice is that you can use the opposite pattern, but we don't have double-sided paper today. We can still take advantage of the mixing of patterns by simply cutting 2 single-sided sheets and mixing them up. So here I need to pick some circles. I like having a set of like nesting dies where there's a variety of sizes, because then when I pick a size for cutting the pattern paper, I can just pick the next size up and use that to cut the mat. I said we're not going to be using a lot of mats today, but in this instance, it's going to help us to create a no scrap look that looks really clean. In my opinion, I like giving myself a little bit of room. I'll show you when we cut it out, but it's helpful to me and personally, if I have a cardstock mat when I'm doing these kind of layers. But I'm just gonna tape my circle down, cut it out of the part of the pattern paper that I want it to go back on. So I'm gonna put it here in the center. Perhaps you would prefer to cut it out of the bottom. Maybe that scale will feel better. Actually, no, maybe I'll try it that way this time. But you can cut it out of whatever part of the pattern paper you want to use. I think if you're going to do like a landscape card, I kind of like it in the center more, but maybe for like a portrait style card, towards the bottom is helpful. It doesn't really matter where on the card you put it. So I have attached the large 3x8 panel with a hole cut in it to a slimline card base. And the reason that I like having a mat for these is I could take this and fit it right in that circle. Absolutely. But I would have to make sure that the circle that I cut was, really even in exactly where I wanted it, not a little to the left or right. In this case, I think it's totally fine. As you see, it fits right in there. There is a little bit of an indent from the die around it, but actually that to me could be a nice detail. I have no problem just doing this. But if you like don't want to have to deal with, centering it exactly, if you're trying to work quickly or something like that, having this cardstock mat can then allow you to have just a little bit more forgiveness. If you want to shift it up just a little bit or to the left or right, you have just a little bit of room. In this case though, if you don't fit it right back in, you may want to add a little bit of a cardstock scrap to kind of help prop it up and make it more even, because depending on the thickness of your paper, you have that to account for that hole in the paper. I don't think with most pattern paper it particularly matters, but it's just something it's worth mentioning. And then what I decided to do, in addition to cutting a whole bunch of sentiments, and I realized that sentiment set is not going to be available at JoAnn's, but it's really just very simple sentiments, and they are cut in strips, which you could very much do on your paper trimmer. That die set certainly makes it easier, but I'm trying to keep some really simple generic supplies. So what I noticed at the craft store was there was a pack of die cut leaves. And I was like, ooh, yeah, that would be really convenient. And I was like, oh, I have a lot of die cut leaves, or I have a lot of stamps that are leaves, or even dies that are leaves. And I was like, I should probably try to use some of those. So I did cut. I stamped and then cut some Gina K Thankful leaves, or some leaves from the Gina K Thankful set. And I'm going to use those today just because, again, I wanted to use my stash as opposed to purchasing something new that I didn't really need. But if you want to, you might pick up those die cuts. So I'm noticing here that doesn't quite look right. I have this like red and orange paper. So the red or orange really pops off this blue, but neither one is really popping off of this orange. I stamped these ones in yellow, and the base color was very, very close to the color of the craft cardstock. And so you kind of can't see it. You can only see the yellow veins. Sorry, I'll bring them a little bit closer. So like technically I did stamp these and there's a color underneath there, but you can't see it. It's frustrating when that happens, but I still think they worked out. They're still cute. You can pop these up. A way that I like to use scraps is to take, so when I used the leftover craft cardstock to cut these circle mats, I do have a little bit of scraps here that I could take advantage of. And I'm gonna make what I call fake foam tape, where I just take 2 pieces of thick cardstock. This cardstock that I cut, I believe is like 100 pounds or something like that. It's a nice weight for card bases, and I'll just stick 2 bits together. Of course I could die cut a leaf out of this or something, or a sentiment, but I don't have a clear purpose for it at the moment. At the moment it just looked like a piece of scrap. So now I take that, I just tape 2 of them together. You can go 3 or 4 depending on the thickness and depending on how much you like how thick you like your dimension, and then put a little adhesive on the back of that. Similarly, you could do something, put a little bit of pop-up behind your sentiments as well. And then the reason that I lifted this up a little bit from the bottom is because I wanted to put my sentiment right under it, give myself a really clear place to put that. And so I could put something like the Bountiful Blessings. I wanted to use another challenging paper from the pattern paper pack, and that is this turkey. Super cute. I definitely want him to be a focal point on a card. I could use sketch 1 where I just cut this whole strip, but then, I'm leaving this as the second card. So I'm going to take advantage of the fact that there's the really cool turkey at the bottom, but there is also a bunch of this interesting like leaf and acorn here. So we're going to use sketch number 3, and we're going to cut this to the 3-inch mark. And I measured the turkey, and it's close, but you can get the whole turkey in. And so it's 3 inches wide, and we'll cut it in half this other way. So I have 2 3x4 inch panels, just like it calls for in this sketch. And then it says to take this other piece. Now there's just this like little bit of tiny, like the little foliage around the turkey that's still poking through. I'm not gonna worry too much about that. I'm just gonna cut this in half. And if you were thinking like, oh, that looks a little out of place, it looks like basically, I mean, to me it kind of looks like there's a smudge on the patterned paper. What I would think about doing is maybe just inking the edges of this patterned paper so that it doesn't look like there's a smudge there. It's just covered by a little bit of ink, and there's ink everywhere. But that's totally up to you how, you know, if that's bothering you or not. And again, I know you might not have the same exact pattern paper, but just wanting to think about, you know, problem solving that I do as I design my cards. Okay, so here, I'm like, this is tricky because I don't really like how this is the same pattern on the same pattern. So how could I problem solve that? Well, I did have this other patterned paper with the leaves that I thought would be nice as 3x4s, but I don't know if it would look very good as strips. So I might want to come to just a second patterned paper and do that sort of mix up thing again. I think I will pick something really bold. This is like, it's not a solid paper, but it's very full. And so that to me kind of presents a high contrast with this more blank patterned paper. So I will similarly cut this one to 3x4 and then 1.5 by 8 inch pieces. All these measurements are on the sketch. I do try to mention them out loud just in case anybody's like not wanting to download the sketch or anything like that. And then that to me provides a higher contrast. I can get away with not adding my mats, things like that. And then the opposite card would be using these in the background and this in the foreground. And so then what I might want to come in and do to embellish them is here with the turkey, he's pretty much just needs his happy Thanksgiving, right? Like, we're good to go. We're gonna highlight that turkey. But this one, we might want to add a little more interest to it, or we might be okay with just a simple sentiment and let those leaves kind of stand out. But over here, I think we're gonna need some interest. Starting to wonder why I stamped so many red leaves, because apparently they don't really look very good. They just blend into all my background paper. And we're just gonna have to be really bold and use these yellow leaves that I'm not very sure about. But maybe like a little gathering of them with a sentiment sort of overlapping them. I think in general it looks nice when you're doing a little like gathering of things if they're all sort of touching each other, so that they're all, you know, overlapping each other just a bit, and it really kind of helps pull and tie them all together. So the last challenge I want to talk about is really large scale on so like these are 6x8, and so to me they're probably meant mostly for card makers, but some of these patterns are really large scale, and I'm going to show you like an A2 size card for contrast, so you could see, like, you know, these leaves take up a good portion of that card, and so going to a slimline card gives you a little bit more room, which is nice, but also I think it's okay to sometimes cut these into smaller pieces than you might initially think. You might think, oh, it's such a big paper that I have to use a big piece of it. And I think there's some ways, some things you can consider and decide whether or not a particular pattern paper is going to work well if it's a, you know, big scale pattern in small strips. One is simply by measuring it. So something that I'll do sometimes is like, you know, maybe I think this one will work well, is I say, okay, my sketch calls for a 1/2 inch strip. Let me just see what a 1/2 inch strip looks like. And so if I place this here, so 7 and then 6.5, and I look at that and I go, you know, I think you can still tell that it's leaves. Like, I think it still looks pretty fall. Great, then I can go ahead and confidently cut that. And then similarly here, put this at the 7-inch mark. And a pattern like this, it doesn't matter that it's not really clear that it's a plaid, I guess you'd say. You know, like it has the different colors of stripes. Like I'm eliminating a lot of its plaidness, and it's just now becoming more of a stripe pattern paper. Again, that's okay, because I've tested it out and I go, even at this smaller bit, it still looks good. So, you know, if you feel that instinct, you say, oh, that patterned paper is just too large, too busy. I'm not going to use it as a small strip. You know, just take the minute and see if you like it when you measure it, and you just do that small sample. Like here, these squirrels, I'm like, you know, if I cut it to a 1/2-inch strip, wow, I've lost a lot of what makes this paper special. And so this one isn't so good for that. But other pattern papers still work well. So don't be afraid to cut large scale patterns to a smaller scale or to smaller pieces. So here, this last and final sketch, sketch number 4, is asking us to cut two 3x4s and these 1/2-inch strips. I personally like to cut the 1/2-inch strips off first. I find that to be a little bit easier to do. So I go from 6 to 5.5, and then to 5 and 4.25, so that I'm getting those little strips out of the way, and I'm not trying to just like get a 1/2-inch strip off a larger piece, if that makes sense. And so we'll keep going, and then also cut our 3x4s. 4, 3.5, 3, and then our 3x4 piece. And this also, like this particular sketch, does afford you an opportunity to enjoy the more large scale portion of the pattern as well. So when I've already lost that leaf paper somewhere in this mess I call a desk. But you know, this larger scale leaf pattern, we're gonna get a good chunk of it. So then I will add the strips to the background. And as you can see, I mean, that's very much clear that these were leaves. It really worked out well in these instances, even though it was a larger scale patterned paper. I'll be the first to say, I'm not sure I actually love this pattern paper that much in the end. I just feel like the brown is a little bit too different than the craft cardstock, but it doesn't look bad by any means. Maybe adding another like layer with some cardstock mats would help some of that. Luckily, I think that the red stands out enough. I can use some of those red leaves, and certainly the red stands out on this like brownish paper here. So at least there's that about that brownish paper, even if it is not my favorite. But this adds to the pile of cards I was able to quickly make with some pattern paper that, like, again, I was really like drawn to because I love fall patterns, but I really kind of tried to dive in and use some of the maybe not so clearly like what you would do with it pattern paper. You know, I think there's some pattern paper where you see it and you're like, of course I use it like this, it's, you know, and then other pattern paper, you're like, ooh, that scale of the card is really big. Oh, how do I cut around it to make that work? That kind of thing. So just kind of trying to give you some ideas for those situations. Using all the tips and tricks that I mentioned in the video, I was able to create 14 cards, and we used 4 different 6x8 for Slimline card templates, and those will all be linked in the video description so that you can download them for free, or if you want to save some time, you can find the pack in the Etsy shop. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.